Well, good evening, everybody. Thanks for turning up tonight to listen to our talk on the Buildings Home for Dales Birds project that we're working on, that we've just received funding for. So the introduction here will be about what we're trying to do with the project, some of the birds that we're trying to protect, the reasons that we're doing it, and how we're asking for your help to protect a lot of these iconic birds within the national park. Next slide, please. So a number of the species that we've thought about, we are really used to seeing them in our local communities around the Dales, which I think, one of the reasons why we're really fortunate that we've got some of some of these species. I think for me, one of the first things that really, many years ago, really, that sort of flagged up how fortunate we are that we've still got some of these is we were running the Malham Peregrine project down at Malham Cove of the RSPB. And when we first started it, we did a bit of a media launch and got people up from the National Park, RSPB, to sort of formally launch the project. And I was walking back down through the Malham village after being up at the Cove with one of the senior RSPB staff members who was running the Art Birds Brilliant project then. And I was telling him all about the fantastic birds we get in the Dales, the black grouse, the breeding waders. And as we were walking through Malham, he just stopped and said, "Oh, you've got house sparrows." And I just sort of said, "Yeah, well, of course have." Anyway, these black grouse, these waders, all these, iconic species. And he said, "No, you've actually got house sparrows in the village." And I said, "Yeah, we're really fortunate that a lot of our, all the towns and small villages in the Dales have these." And he was saying that he lived in a small village very similar to Malham down in Bedfordshire. Very similar size, very similar type of village, but they'd lost their house sparrows completely from that. So I think, we are very fortunate and lucky that we've got some of the key species that we've got this project focused on that are still present in good numbers in and around our local communities in the Dales. So one of the rationales of this project is to try and make sure that we maintain and keep these populations around our local communities in really good health, and we really need your help to protect them. Next slide, please. So some of the key species we're sort of focusing on are ones that are really closely linked to the local communities. So they need the buildings, the farms, the habitats are in and around these villages for them to thrive. As you'll see from some of the forthcoming slides, these birds really are in steep decline nationally. And although, like I say, we do have good populations in some of our villages in the Dales, we really want to make sure that this continues into the future. So the four key species we're focusing are house martin, which is in the top left here. Top right is the house sparrow. Bottom left is the swift and also the starling. The species that are all found in and around these villages and all need the local communities. A lot of them will nest in the buildings and are an integral part of the villages and towns within the national park. Next slide, please. So these are the trends that have been lifted from the British Trust for Ornithology website. So this is results from long-term monitoring from things like the breeding bird surveys that some of you may participate in. So if you can, just look at the trends here. You don't need to bother about the figures too much. These are basically an index that's worked out and calculated every year. But you can see from this house martins have declined really, really dramatically since the monitoring began in the mid 1990s. Next slide, please. Similar to house sparrow, these have gone, fluctuations, but as you can see, there is a sort of a trend here that goes up and down. But we do see that more in recent years there is a real staggering drop in these, where they have been lost from many places, particularly in urban areas in the south of England. Next slide, please. Really dramatic decline. You don't need to be great at maths to see that is a really significant long-term decline in the swift species. That really is in dire need of our help now. And there is, as you well know, or many of you well know, there is real significant concerns about the swift population, which is why we're trying to set this project up. Next slide, please. And again, starling. We perhaps, used to seeing the big murmurations that get a lot of the press headlines. These are mainly birds from the continent, from northern Scandinavia, Russia, that come into winter, Eastern Europe into this country. And despite the large flock sizes in winter, as you can see from this graph, there is a really startling long-term decline in the breeding population of this species. So hopefully those 4 graphs again will give you a real indication of why some of these species are in trouble nationally and why we want to work to help them. Next slide, please. So really, just some basic information on the project that we're trying to put forward. So we have picked these 4 key species that I've mentioned that we're trying to focus on, because these really are species that are all dependent on the communities, the buildings and houses within those communities, but also we need to forget that they need the food sources as well. So we also want to try and raise awareness of, and where possible start to look at some appropriate management for the feeding areas, the insect-rich areas that are so important in and around the villages of the Dales. A lot of these species are declining because of loss in nesting sites as well. So, new buildings, we're trying to collectively encourage, new builds across the country to have nest boxes incorporated into them. But in a lot of the urban areas, things like wooden decking, artificial lawns that are being put in, really reducing, the feeding areas for things like especially house sparrow, starling, that need these natural grassland sites to feed on. So we're trying to focus on how important that these local, gardens and areas of habitat around the villages can particularly be. So one of the key things we're trying to highlight is the sort of community angle on this, is that these birds need the local communities to help manage them. And also the people within those local communities can have such a key focus on actually delivering this project across the Dales. So we're looking to work with various local groups across the national park to look at help with monitoring. So we'd really like to set up a monitoring program, which I'll talk about shortly, in terms of so we can actually keep a trend on these species. In many cases, we know that they're still present in these towns and villages, but we're not sure on what the population trend is. So it's really important that we understand how these species are doing. And as part of that, we'll look at training local community to groups to help us with that monitoring, hopefully. As I've said, the habitat and nesting sites are key, so we're looking at provision of nest boxes. So we've got funding through this project to put up nest boxes for all 4 species. And again, that's where we're going to need the help of local community groups to help do that, in identifying sites and working with people within the villages to actually get these done. And also to try and focus on some of the habitat side of it as well. So keeping these insect-rich areas in and around the villages will be so crucial to providing food for all these particular species. So like I say, we'll be looking at developing a citizen sites monitoring programme and in restoring these vital habitats and making sure that there are plenty of nest sites for these particular species to nest in. We're doing this because, like I say, we have got good populations still in many areas, so it's a lot easier to build and increase when you've got birds present, rather than trying to build them up from incredibly low numbers, or where the species really is in decline. So this is a 3-year project. We're fortunate that we've just received funding for it. So this is part of the inaugural introductions to the project that we're doing to various community groups. And we have 3 years now where we want to work with yourselves and the other project groups to try and deliver all this work we want to do to protect these species. Next slide, please. So this is the key partnerships within the organisations that are looking at doing this. So it's being led by the Yorkshire Dales Millennium Trust, but the National Park Authority, Haytime, Cedar Sapling, BTO, RSPB will be working closely together. And thanks to funding from the Heritage Lottery, this has given us the monies to be able to do this project. Next slide, please. So yeah, just to look at, and reiterate why we're doing this and look at the focal species. So as you can see from the graph, there's various different figures floating around, but there's been substantial declines in the house martin populations right across the country. As I'm sure you'll be aware, these do make natural nests, basically collect mud and make these nest cups under the eaves of buildings, and they will come back to these nests year after year. They often say that house martins will like to nest where they think house martins have bred before, so whilst they will reuse nests, things like putting up artificial nests for this species can suggest to them that birds have nested there before, and they may well look at building new nests adjacent to on the same building as where nests have been before. And these are area. I'm sure you know these are aerial feeders, so they need a lot of insects. So the wetland and grassland habitats are key for providing that food source for this species. Next slide, please. The house sparrow, again, you can see quite dramatic declines in this. And these really are an important species that like to nest in buildings. They are quite untidy with the nest, so well, you often see lots of bits of grass and leaves and whatnot sticking out from their nest sites. But they'll nest in crevices under slates, and they're particularly under threat in some of the older buildings where the pointing's fallen out, where the house sparrows will get in and make their nests. If these buildings are repaired and slates replaced, and the pointing that's all redone, can actually cause these nest sites to decline. So one of the things we need to do with them is make sure that there is long-term nest sites for them within these buildings. And they'll eat of various different things. Insects are a key, food source for them, particularly in spring and during the breeding season. But they have a very varied diet and will eat a whole range of nuts, seeds, and berries as well. And also found on the sort of edges of town, so things like hedges, woodland edges, and suitable grassland feeding sites close to the village are really important for the house sparrows. Next slide, please. The starling, like you've seen in the graphs, they're really, another one with these huge declines. And these will tend to nest in holes in trees. They will often dry stone walls, and being a slightly bigger bird than the house sparrow, do need these larger crevices in buildings, especially the old sort of barns and farm buildings that, again, very similar to house sparrow, are really at risk if these are actually, repaired or the repointing is done. So provision of nest boxes will be a key one to help this particular species. As you can see from the photograph, they've got reasonably long bills, so they do a lot of probing for invertebrates in the soil, and they need that wide range of insects in the surrounding areas for them to feed their young on. A bit like house sparrows, they are quite require a diverse range of habitats. So they'll also nest in buildings and trees. They'll be out feeding in the meadows, woodland edges, and also wetland areas are really key for this particular species. Next slide, please. And the swift, which I'm sure you're all aware of, the real sort of sign of summer back in the day was when you get your first swift. As with all the others, has shown dramatic declines, right across the country. Will nest in a lot of the buildings. We need a relatively small gap under the eaves mainly, and sort of loose slates are the key sort of sites for these. Again, at risk of being lost from building repairs. And these will actually use some of the bigger buildings, so often the churches or village halls or something like that will have a small colony of swifts present in them. These are quite remarkable birds. They will pair for life, and they return to the same site year after year after wintering down in Africa. And because of the fact that they will return to the same site each year, they are particularly susceptible to loss of nest sites through building repairs. So, it's been shown elsewhere that provision of nest boxes is a key way of protecting this particular species. Again, these require the aerial insects. Swifts, I'm sure you're aware, will travel large distances to feed, especially when there's thunderstorms or rain within an area. But we really want to make sure that there's, the longer they spend away from the nest site and the chicks, the more pressure it puts on the chicks. So we want to make sure that there's enough feeding areas for these birds, weather dependent, in and around the villages of the Dales. And again, you often see, especially in poor weather, wetland areas and grassland, are a key area. You know, long grass that has a lot of insects in it. You can often see on a sort of cool, windy day, swifts and other hirundines feeding over these fields. So these habitats are crucial to their survival. Okay, next slide. So just, I'm sure you're aware of these. You know, one of the things we're trying to do with this project is look at provision of nest boxes. So there is a lot of different styles of nest boxes for different species that we're looking at. We have funding within the project, so we are looking at provision of funding in the local communities that we're working with to get boxes for all species up. We know that some areas are dealing on, you know, especially swifts, and a lot of good work has already been done by a lot of the community groups. But also we want to try and make sure there is similar provision for the other species as well. So the funding through the project will enable large numbers of nest boxes to be put up in each area. And this is just a few of the different types that you can do, that you can have for all the different species. Next slide, please. So really, you know, we are going to need your help on this. So this is why we're doing these talks. We're coming around and trying to meet the community groups. We're grateful you've already offered support in terms of you know, letters of support. When we were putting the project together, they've been crucial in allowing the Heritage Lottery Fund to know that we've got community groups that are already doing some good work, but you know, need a bit more support. Some to a greater and lesser extent than others. So things like, you know, the provision of nest boxes and the monitoring will be a really useful tool to help these groups develop and continue the work that we're doing. As I mentioned, we want to make sure we know what these species are doing. So the long-term trend of these. So these are, all 4 species are featured in the nature recovery plan for the national park. They are priority species that require bespoke conservation. And we are looking to try and make sure that all these key species are monitored. So we're hoping to develop, or we will be developing a monitoring programme with the help of the British Trust for Ornithology. That we can hopefully roll out to local groups and local people, that with help of some training towards it. Once we get the monitoring program developed, will help us, you know, in the short term monitor these birds. But we want one of the legacies of this project, once the project funding has stopped, to hopefully maintain the interests of the nesting and feeding sites for these birds, that I'm sure are also, you know, key goals of your local groups. But also hopefully we can look at working to make sure that this monitoring is continued, so we see how these species are doing in the medium to longer term. So I think, is that my last slide?
Yep, over to me. So yeah, I just wanted to put a few pictures together to kind of demonstrate the sorts of habitats that Ian's just been talking about, both for sort of nesting and foraging opportunities. So yeah, as you can see at the top there, we've got a nice example of a veteran tree. We've got a nice wildflower meadow, dry stone wall. We've got a nice hedge there, which I'm sure you'll recognise. Yeah, again, for the sort of seeds and berries and things that Ian's mentioned. And then wetland habitats and wooded habitats as well. So quite a range, but I wanted to put these up here because this really links to the sort of community involvement element of the project. We have funding to put on training and habitat restoration that will be useful for these house nesting bird populations. And really what we want to do is for it to be very community led. So if there's any particular habitat types that you know in the area local to you that that we could potentially do some work on, or if there's a particular skill that you want to do some more training on. I know we've done a lot of hedge laying already up in Swaledale, but other things could be sort of wildflower propagation, growing trees, again, as we've already done, but more of that. Dry stone walling, we could do scything, anything basically that will benefit these bird populations. We have funding to put on training like that. But again, we want it to come from you. So if there is something that you're particularly interested in, let me know and we'll see what we can do basically. Yeah, and then in terms of habitat management and restoration, again, there's lots we can do, and it's kind of community led. So let us know again. So I've put together a timeline for the project. This is a very approximate timeline, so don't hold me to it. But I just wanted to kind of demonstrate roughly what the project will look like. As Ian kind of said, each community will need different support in different areas and will have different sort of targets that they want to focus on. So this will look slightly different for each community, but just to give you a bit of an idea. So in the first year, we'll have the walk, talk and watch days in each of the community areas, and that will be an opportunity to walk through the local town or village with an RSPB advisor or Ian to sort of look at different habitats that will be useful for the birds or different buildings that might be possible for nest boxes to go up. And you'll be able to ask questions and look at maps, and if you want to bring photos of other areas that you think might be good for a nest box, that'll be an opportunity to do that. So we'll start with that event in the spring. We've got a few dates lined up for the different community areas. And then coming into summer will be sort of community meadow time. So again, Swelldale has done a lot of work on this already, but during the summer it will be when we can work on meadows that we've already been doing work on. We can do further improvements and any new areas as well. And we'll also be looking at those sort of smaller areas as well. So it doesn't have to be huge meadows. It can be little pockets of areas and communities that'll be really good to focus on. Come the autumn is when we'll be doing nest box installation. This will be every year, so if you want a nest box and it's not happening in the first year, don't worry, there'll be plenty of opportunities. We'll be paying a contractor to put up the boxes, so don't worry about thinking you're going to have to start clambering up ladders and stuff. We will get a list together of every building that will be having nest box, and the contractor will sort that out. So yeah, that'll happen in autumn. And then I've just got at the top there habitat management training. Again, not linked to any particular time of the year because it obviously depends on what that training is. But yeah, just to highlight that there will be opportunities throughout the year to do training of whatever your focus wants to be. Okay, so moving on to the second year. In the first year is when we will have been working with the BTO to develop a system for monitoring the birds. So as we come into the second year, hopefully that will be in place and we'll be able to put on some training for anyone that's interested in how to go about doing that monitoring and bird ID as well, so that we can start monitoring the populations. So I've put woodland creation here, so we'll be doing more of our woodland work as we have been through the seed to sapling project. There'll be more opportunities for that through this project. Again, I've got the meadows there, but like I said, it doesn't need to be the same every year. It'll be sort of as the demand comes with the communities. Then we've got woodland condition assessment training. This is another key part of the project that we're sort of developing in the first year and then we'll hopefully roll out in the second year. We're aware that there's been a lot of planting done in the Dales. YDMT has done a lot of planting, the National Park's done a lot of planting over the years. And, we're getting to a point now where this woodland needs to be kind of assessed and managed to see what condition it's in and what needs to be done. So our hope is that we can train up some community volunteers to do condition assessments of the woodlands, which will then inform which woodlands need to be focused on for management plans. So that will come into year 2 and then continue on into the 3rd year. And hopefully the idea is that'll carry on beyond the end of the project as well. Veteran trees are another really key part of the project. So this again is another area where it's really important that we work with the communities, because you will have a much better idea than us about where existing veteran trees might be. You probably walk past them all the time and you'll know where they are that we might not know. So that's another really key one. If there's any particular veteran trees that you know of that we can put some budget towards in this project to protect, let us know about that. And we'll also be planting what will hopefully become veteran trees in the future. So it's essentially landscape trees. And yeah, that'll be happening sort of winter time throughout the duration of the project. So again, any sites that you think might be a good place for that to be. If there's any landowners that want to get involved, that's a really key part of the project as well. And then again, we've got the nest boxes, habitat management training. Like I said, that can be as you want it to be. Yeah, and then the 3rd year, we'll refresh the monitoring training. So don't worry, we won't just do it once and then never return. We'll refresh that training. And then there's essentially a lot of the same, because it's, well, the same categories, but again, this will be, you can do different things in every year. So don't worry about if you do hedge laying in one year, we're not going to make you repeat it or anything like that. We'll switch it up with what each community group wants to do and wants to focus on. And we'll have a celebration event, which will be lovely. And yeah, basically lots of the same but different. So I've focused quite heavily on the sort of community element, but just to give a sort of more rounded overview of the whole project, because it does tie into some other areas as well. I've just put this slide on. So Ian's mentioned the monitoring for citizen science. Just to point out that there will be a report produced at the end of the project. So hopefully that'll give us an idea of what populations we have and the kind of direction we're going in. I mentioned the woodland condition assessments, and yeah, just to point out that they will inform management plans, but that we won't be expecting members of the community to do that. But the condition assessments will inform them, so that can happen. Wildlife hedgerows are a key part of this project. So there will be planting going on, and we'd like community groups to get involved, but just to say that will be happening as well. I've mentioned community meadows, but as we've said, sort of the insect life is what's really important to these birds, and meadows aren't the only type of grassland that are of benefit. I think, Ian, correct me if I'm wrong, but is it starlings that actually look quite like sort of quite short grass? Is that right?
Yeah, the things like starling will probe the ground for invertebrates. They need the short grass, but things the longer grass and the meadows that are really good for the aerial invertebrates are really important for the swifts and the house martins.
Yeah. So yeah, just to point that out, that we've obviously focused a lot on the meadows, but other types of grassland are important too. So again, community areas, if there's areas that something can be done as a habitat, but not necessarily a meadow, then that's things we can look at as well. And then for the sort of legacy of this project, what we want is, we don't want to sort of do 3 years of a project and then it drops off the face of the earth. The whole point is that we're creating a legacy that can continue beyond the project. So as part of that, we'll be producing a couple of resource packs, one of which will be aimed at sort of community groups like yourselves, to help you carry on this sort of habitat management and monitoring in future. And there'll be another one which is aimed at schools that will sort of tie into the curriculum. Through this project, we are going to be doing work with partner schools as well. The National Park will be delivering that side of things. So yeah, just to mention that, because again, with the nest boxes, they don't necessarily just have to be up on sort of barns and houses. It can be like schools and village halls and things like that as well. We'll be hopefully getting some nest camera footage. The aim of that will be that it will go up on the YDMT website. So at the moment, we're just looking for an existing nest box that we can put some cameras into. So if anyone does know of any nest boxes that do have some of the house nesting birds in, let us know, because it'd be really nice to get some of that footage up on the website. And as we go through, we'll be making sort of various educational videos. So it'd be really good if anyone's keen to get involved with that. We'll be doing that as we go along, just to sort of record the training that we're doing so that we can share that more widely. Things like the hedge laying and scything and wildflower propagation, things like that. It's really good to get some clips of that to share with everyone. I think that's everything. I think most people on this call will already be signed up, but for anyone that isn't, the community conservation mailing list is where I will be sharing all the information about this project. So any upcoming training events, any news, will all go through that mailing list. So if anyone isn't signed up, do sign up.